There is something in the fog. Mournwick Hall lay beyond the reach of ordinary roads, as though it had been placed there by error and never corrected. It stood upon a rise of stone and ancient earth, surrounded on three sides by marshland that surrendered itself twice a day to the tide. At high water, a narrow channel revealed itself, winding like a reluctant vein through reeds and gray water, permitting passage by boat alone. At low tide, the land closed again, swallowing all approach. It was said, by those who spoke of it at all, that the fog came every night. Thomas Calderwick arrived in the late afternoon, when the light was already thinning, and the water lay slack and dark beneath the hull of the small boat that brought him in. He watched the manor emerge gradually from the haze, its irregular towers and steep roof lines resolving themselves piece by piece, like a thought forming against resistance. He felt nothing then but interest. Calderwick was a man who trusted in ink, evidence, and the orderly collapse of nonsense under examination. He had made a modest reputation in London by exposing frauds of a spiritual inclination, and the idea that a country house might devour its guests offended his reason. That people should vanish without trace suggested not a spirit, but a circumstance, one poorly observed and poorly reported. He intended to observe it properly. Mr. Edgar Morton received him at the threshold. The butler was tall, spare, and dressed in a fashion that had not altered in decades. His face bore no expression of welcome or warning, only a kind of professional endurance, as though he had long ago accepted a duty he could neither abandon nor explain. "You are expected," Morton said. Calderwick smiled. "I should hope so." Inside, the hall was vast and cold, its stone floor worn smooth by generations of passing feet. A fire burned low in the great hearth, though the air remained stubbornly chill. Somewhere above them, the building creaked, not with age, but with adjustment, like a body settling into sleep. "You will not leave the house after nightfall," Morton said as he took Calderwick's coat. "That seems an odd rule," Calderwick replied. "It is an old one. I have no intention of wandering the marsh in the dark," Calderwick said lightly. Morton paused, then inclined his head. "Intentions," he said, "are not always consulted." At supper, Calderwick met the only other residents of Mournwick Hall, Henry and Margaret Brimley. They were seated close together, as though the distance between chairs were a thing to be feared. Age had not made them frail so much as careful. Every movement seemed measured, every word considered before it was allowed to leave the mouth. "You'll be leaving in the morning, then," Mrs. Brimley said, almost hopefully, once introductions were complete. "Not if the story proves worth the journey," Calderwick replied. Mr. Brimley lowered his eyes to his plate. "It always does," he said. Later, as dusk gave way to night, they gathered in the great hall before the fire. The flames threw long, uncertain shadows across the stone walls, shaping faces where none ought to be. Outside the tall windows, the fog pressed nearer, obscuring the glass until it seemed the hall floated in a white and shifting sea. Brandy was poured. It tasted old, as though it had waited a very long time to be drunk. "You've heard the stories," Calderwick said, more to prompt than to ask. That people go out when the fog comes and never return." "Yes," said Mr. Brimley. "And before you say it, no, they are not exaggerations." Mrs. Brimley folded her hands. "When we first arrived," she said, "we laughed as you do now. We thought the fog an inconvenience, nothing more." "And the first to disappear?" Calderwick asked. "A governess," Mr. Brimley replied. "Miss Harrington. She stepped out to fetch her shawl from the garden path. The fog had come quickly that night. We heard her call once, only once." Mrs. Brimley closed her eyes briefly. She sounded puzzled, as though the world had altered without warning. Another story followed. A merchant from the north, stout and confident, who wagered a sovereign that he could walk to the edge of the marsh and back before the fog thickened. He was heard laughing somewhere beyond the reeds. The laughter ended abruptly, as if a hand had been laid across his mouth. Then a young married couple, guests of only 3 nights. They were heard arguing beyond the windows, their voices muffled, distorted, until the argument dissolved into pleading. "And the house?" Calderwick asked quietly. "Was it always like this?" "No," Mr. Brimley said. "It learned." He explained that Mournwick Hall had once been a place of modest hospitality, used by families waiting out tides, storms, or illness. People stayed, people talked, people left. "Until one winter," Mrs. Brimley added, "when the fog did not lift for 3 days. On the 3rd night, a child vanished. No one saw her go," she said, "but afterward, the doors began to open by themselves." Calderwick shifted, discomfort creeping in despite himself. "You speak as though the house remembers," he said. "It does," said Mr. Brimley, "and it repeats." A sound passed through the hall, then a soft, deliberate footstep upon stone. Calderwick turned sharply. "Someone else is awake?" Mr. Morton stood near the wall, hands folded behind his back. "No," he said. The fire snapped. Outside, the fog pressed closer. That night, as Calderwick retired, Mr. Morton appeared beside him in the corridor with such suddenness that Calderwick startled. "You should not have stayed," Morton said. "I intend to leave in the morning," Calderwick replied. Morton's expression twitched, not quite a smile. "You will intend many things," he said. "The house listens politely. It rarely agrees." "You speak as though this place were alive." "I speak as one who has watched it learn," Morton replied. "Why stay?" Calderwick asked. The butler regarded him steadily. "Someone must close the doors," he said, "and sometimes open them." The whispers began shortly after midnight. At first they were distant, nearly mistaken for wind in stone. Then they grew more deliberate, names, half-spoken sentences, fragments of regret. Calderwick opened his door. The corridor lay empty, lit by a single lamp at the far end. As he watched, a door farther down the passage opened slowly, though no hand touched it. Later, in the gallery overlooking the hall, he encountered them more clearly. Figures stood where no one ought to be, pale, incomplete, as though memory itself had taken shape. They did not speak, but watched him with expressions of expectation, even hope. one stepped forward. "I thought," it whispered, "that morning would come." Calderwick fled. By the fourth night, his skepticism lay in ruins. Reason could not account for a house that rehearsed its dead, nor for fog that waited like a listener at the edge of light. He resolved to leave at once. But the fog had come early. The channel was gone. The marsh was lost. The world beyond Mournwick Hall had ceased to exist. That final night stretched endlessly. Doors opened and closed. Footsteps circled his room. Voices called him gently, persuasively, promising guidance through the fog. "You won't be alone," they said. By morning, the fog lay smooth and unbroken. Henry and Margaret Brimley found Calderwick's room empty, his bed untouched, his coat gone. Mr. Morton stood at the threshold and looked out into the white. "He went out," Mrs. Brimley said. "Yes," Morton replied. "They always do in the end." Weeks later, another guest arrived. In a drawer of the abandoned room, he found a leather-bound notebook. He read it by firelight, frowning at the final lines written in a hand that had lost all certainty. "The fog is not empty. It is full of those who believed they would return. If you are reading this, do not wait for morning." Well then, you've made it all the way to the end. Some listeners leave early. Some grow uneasy when the night grows too quiet. But you stayed. And if you enjoyed tonight's ghostly tale, feel free to like the video, share it with a fellow night wanderer, and subscribe to the channel. It helps keep the lantern burning and the stories coming. Thank you for listening. Until we meet again for more short ghost stories, long after midnight.